Okay, so this PowerPoint is going to be about Snowball, just in case he comes up in your character question. Right, folks, remember that allegorically, Snowball is meant to represent Trotsky. Okay, and for some people, Trotsky is seen as a hero. For some people, Trotsky is seen as a traitor. And what you have to remember is it's the same for Snowball. For some, Snowball is the hero, and for some, Snowball is the enemy. That's what he becomes for Napoleon. So again, when we're thinking about that idea of Snowball and counter-argument, there's going to be an understanding that Snowball is a complex character. We can't just see him as flawless. Right, let's go and see our first encounter with Snowball. Okay, so the first time we come across Snowball, he's referred to as being quicker in speech. Now, folks, that's important because what Snowball represents is intellectual power. Intellectual power. If Napoleon represents physical power, then we have to remember that Snowball represents intellectual power. It says at the very start that when it came to teaching, this fell naturally upon the pigs. And this is something that Snowball would naturally see as his role as a teacher, his role as an educator, because he is a man who believes in ideology. He's a man who believes in a certain framework of beliefs. And that ideological power, his intellectual power, is what he uses to try and develop animalism. Now, that's an important thing. He tries to use his intellectual power to develop animalism. Napoleon uses his physical power to develop Napoleon. Two different ideas. So if we want to see Snowball in a good light, then we could say that he is driven by the desire to make animalism a complete system of thought. He doesn't seem to have the same egotistical desire as Snowball. So let's move on to the next slide. Right, now there's that phrase that I just used. I'm going to see if I can change my ink colour. Okay, a complete system of thought. Now, Snowball would love that because he is an intellectual and therefore he's spending his time making sure that animalism is a complete system of thought that you can buy into. Now, remember too that it says this complete system of thought that Snowball helps develop is elaborating upon the ideas of Old Major. Now, does that mean that he's adding his own ideas in? Possibly. So it's an elaboration of what Old Major wanted, and therefore it is something that is going to be influenced by Snowball's desires as well. It doesn't say how much input Napoleon and Squealer have into this complete system of thought. It just references the pigs, but because of the ideological power of Snowball, he's probably going to be the forerunner in that. Okay. Didn't mean to do that. It says the pig's elaboration. Oh gosh, now there's the apostrophe that should be there. The pig's elaboration or complication of Old Major's teaching is tactical. Now remember that Snowball is a tactician just the same way that Napoleon is. But the difference is Snowball is using his tactics to develop animalism and Napoleon is using his tactics to develop Napoleon. See if I can scroll this up. Oh, don't know how to do that. Oh, it'll come off there. Oh, no, I don't know what's happening there. I'm just drawing lines. But please just remember that what Snowball does is he complicates Old Major's dream at times, creating this complete system of thought. And also then the pigs reduce Old Major's dream as well. So they're doing two oppositional things at the same time. Confusing, well, that's really what they want to do. They want to confuse. Because that way, they are always going to be needed to be the translator. They're always going to be needed to be the teacher. Okay, next slide. Right, now, here's something that Snowball does, that Old Major does as well. He offers glittering generalities. This idea that he offers propaganda that nobody could ever say they're not in favour of because it sounds so good. He says, can you not understand that liberty is worth more than ribbons? So he offers them this idea of liberty. That's to Molly. This idea of liberty. What does Molly know about the word liberty? What do any of the animals know about that? They just know it sounds positive. They just know that they want it. And that's what old Major offered. That's what Snowball offers. Glittering generalities that sound good, that are going to have emotive impact. But then the idea is, how do you get that? How do you get liberty? That's not something that Snowball is making clear at this moment in time. But he is appealing to their emotions there by offering them glittering generalities. He asks for individual sacrifices to this complete system of thought. Sacrifices that involve Molly getting rid of her ribbons, which are a symbol of her vanity. But more importantly, Boxer getting rid of his sun hat. Remember that Boxer's sun hat is completely different to Molly's ribbons. Molly's ribbons are vacuous, they're vain, they're just an appendage, she doesn't need them. But Boxer needs the sun hat. If he doesn't have it, the flies get into his eyes, yet he's willing to sacrifice his discomfort for a complete system of thought that he buys into. He is devoted. I'm going to move on now. Okay, now this is what Snowball counts on, and Napoleon later. This idea that the pigs are the teachers because nobody else has the understanding to develop the ideas of animalism. It says they had great difficulty in thinking anything out for themselves, and therefore they absorbed. Now look at that lovely verb choice. We can mention that as one of our language techniques. That verb choice, absorbed. And they are like sponges for everything that Snowball has to say. The animals have no sense of discernment. There's a nice wee word. Discernment. They just absorb everything. It's not as if they say, oh, I like this, but I don't like that. They absorb it all. And that's dangerous because that stops people questioning things. Snowball doesn't want questioning. He wants allegiance. He wants people to make sacrifices, like Boxer had to do with his sun hat. So when we think about Snowball and how wonderful you might want to say he is, yes, okay, he does things that you can say are admirable, but he wants people to be brainwashed into his complete system of thought. He doesn't want questions. Okay, right. What happens when dreams are confronted by reality? The sort of dreams that are offered in those glittering generalities of liberty. Well, if you have a little look, you've got the idea of dual perspective, two different perspectives. What Snowball sees and what the other animals see. For example, back to the ribbons, Molly's ribbons. Snowball says that ribbons should be considered as clothes and all animals should go naked, and Boxer fetches his straw hat. Now, those are sacrifices that Snowball demands. But the key thing is, those sacrifices are made by individuals. Politics impacts upon individuals, and poor Boxer is the one who has to suffer the discomfort because he believes in an ideology. Now, you might say that's fine and dandy, he believes in it, but he doesn't understand it. He believes in something that he doesn't understand, and that is deliberately made to make it something that he won't understand. And surely that's manipulation, a manipulation that's not particularly admirable. Okay, different styles of leadership. What is Snowball's first action once they get Jones out of that farm? Well, his first action is to throw the ribbons on the fire and to say that all animals should go naked. Now, that's really important because his first action is to reinforce doctrine, reinforce rules. And that links to his belief in ideology above all things. He puts the belief in animalism above individuals and their needs, like Boxer and his sun hat, and he reinforces those ideas. Now, that is out of touch. What do these animals need? Why did they rebel in the first place? Because they were hungry. And therefore, he doesn't see that. He just thinks about his devotion to animalism and making everybody else devoted to animalism, and doesn't realise what the animals actually need, which is food in their belly. So in some ways, his intellectual capabilities make him out of touch, that he's not in tune with the animals on that farm. He's above them. And therefore, it leaves room for someone like Napoleon who does understand what the animals need. They need food. So what does he do? He gives them double rations. And therefore, who are the animals going to look to feed their basic needs? Well, it's going to be Napoleon, because they don't understand what Snowball's saying. Sounds good, but they don't understand it. Okay, this just relates to how out of touch Snowball is and how it foreshadows that he's not going to be successful. For example, Molly still goes back to her ribbons. Despite everything that Snowball says, she still wants her ribbons. They make her feel better. And what it does is it highlights the idea that animals and people, they act in self-interest. So no matter how much they might be persuaded to believe in something, there's always that level of self-interest that'll override it. Also, too, the idea that Snowball and the pigs as teachers, they taught themselves to read and write. And for Snowball, that's a really important thing. But it's not really important for the rest of the animals. They don't have the intellectual capability to do that, to read and to write. Remember, the boxer doesn't learn anything more than 4 letters. Some animals don't get beyond the letter A. So again, it shows that perhaps Snowball is out of touch. Okay, so what's really changed with Snowball and his ideas? He, with Napoleon and Squealer, don't actually do work, but they direct and supervise. So he's part of that inequality, that theme of leaders and followers. He's part of that. He takes his supervisory role and he excels in it, but he's not working the same way as the other animals are. And therefore, he is like Napoleon, but in a different way. He's starting to resemble man, more so than we would perhaps think an admirable character should. Okay, remember too that Snowball is absolutely determined to forward the power of animalism, and therefore he engages in propaganda just the way that Squealer and Napoleon do later in the novel. You've got that idea of the pigs making the animals believe that humans are worthless, parasitical beings. There you go. And that sort of simple, that sort of ad hominem personal attack, well, I suppose that's not really personal because that's on the general idea of human beings. So that attack, that pinpointing the enemy sort of propaganda is something that Snowball indulges into. But also remember that phrase of worthless, parasitical human beings is just the same sort of propaganda that old Major engaged in when he declared that the only enemy was man. Okay, Snowball understands that to create a complete system of thought, he has to give the animals some sort of ritual that goes with that complete system of thought. And so he and the other pigs help reinforce this idea of shared identity by creating the flag. And remember, it is Snowball that creates the flag with the green fields and the horn and the hoof, a sort of comic representation of the Soviet flag they had after the Russian Revolution. But what he does is he remembers that animals need something to believe in. They need symbols, they need rituals, and as well as giving them beliefs, he gives them more tangible things like the flag that they can believe in, that they can base their identity upon, I suppose. Okay, now here's something that you need to bear in mind. Remember this phrase that Snowball and Napoleon, these two were never in agreement. So conflict is there right from the very start, I suppose, between Snowball and Napoleon. Two different sorts of power. Snowball with his intellectual power, Napoleon with his physical power. And remember, that conflict is linked to what Snowball and Napoleon really are trying to achieve. Snowball is committed to the cause of animalism. Napoleon is committed to the cause of Napoleon. And there's going to be conflict because of that division there. But these two were never in agreement. And the fact that there's no sense of compromise there perhaps is something that you could criticise both of them for. Okay, the pigs take up their headquarters in the harness room, which is a nice little bit of symbolic meaning there from Orwell, beg your pardon. Remember that we concentrate on the physical power of Napoleon and it becomes psychological power as the novel progresses. But remember, this ideological power of Snowball is just as much a harness, is just as much a means of control as anything that Napoleon and Squealer do later on. So when we're trying to view Snowball in terms of a character who perhaps can be admired, what we need to remember is that he's about controlling the other animals too, controlling the way they think, controlling their sort of moral judgments. And that harness room that he takes up as his headquarters, as well as the other pigs, is a symbol of his desire to control. Okay, now let's think about what Snowball does in terms of ideology. So it says quite a lot in the novel about the types of initiatives that Snowball brings into Animal Farm. But he is, I suppose, he's indefatigable, which means that he's tireless. He's always thinking about his ideology, always thinking about his ideology. But in thinking about his ideology, that means he's becoming more and more distant, really, from what the animals need. Remember, his first action was to harp on about ribbons and not to feed the hungry animals. So he's tirelessly promoting animalism, but in doing that, he's becoming more and more detached from what his animals really want. He brings in lots of movements. You've got the Winter Wool movement, the Re-Education Committee, and what he's trying to do is to promote some sort of intellectual power amongst the animals, to feed their brains rather than their stomachs. But he doesn't factor in the nature of the animals, and that's again another oversight. There are things that Snowball just misses, and he doesn't factor in the idea that these are wild creatures. And therefore, he thinks that his devotion to animalism will be replicated by the other animals, that they will be equally devoted and they will turn away from their instinct. But you've seen that with Molly. She went back to her ribbons. You can't really fight a creature's instinct. But Snowball is so focused on his ideological plans that he overlooks that. That's a fault. He's naive. Okay, now here you've got a nice little bit of irony. Again, a bit of satire. You have the fun to be found in the idea that Snowball's reading and writing classes are heralded as a great success. But look at the facts. Look at the facts that follow on from that sentence. You've got the idea that Boxer can only have 4 letters, Molly knows 6, some animals can't get further than the letter A, and therefore you as an audience appreciate what is being mocked here. You appreciate the dramatic irony. So Snowball might see his reading and writing classes as a success, but in reality they're not. And again, you just have that idea that he's becoming further and further removed from reality of life on Animal Farm. Okay, now, when we're thinking about Snowball, you can't argue with the fact that he uses language as a weapon. Just like Squealer, he's not really using language to communicate, to clarify. What he does is he uses language to confuse. For example, with the idea of the birds again, he says that birds' wings are an organ of propulsion and not manipulation. Who understands that on the farm? Who understands what the word propulsion means? Who understands the difference between propulsion and manipulation? No one, maybe apart from Snowball and Squealer. And yet he uses that because for him, it's not important whether they understand it. It's important that they believe it. And what he is showing is his devotion is not to the animals, not even really to animalism, but to the understanding of a belief that you've got to believe in this, that you've got to be absolutely devoted to it. The animals don't understand his complex language, but he doesn't really care about that. If he confounds them, he confounds them, but he promotes belief, and that's what he thinks is important. Okay, now, you can't get away from the fact that Snowball shows some sense of hypocrisy, okay? Remember the phrase that Snowball and Napoleon were never in agreement, yet the one thing that they agree on is what happens to the windfall apples, and that's that they keep them. So the animals assumed as a matter of course that windfall of apples would be shared out equally because this is a society of equals, is it not? But look, all of the pigs were in full agreement. So the one thing you have to remember is that the only time that Snowball and Napoleon were in agreement was when they had to carve up something that would satisfy the greed of the pigs and the greed of the pigs alone. The only thing that unites Snowball and Napoleon here would be that idea of hypocrisy and also the idea of self-interest. And you're disappointed with Snowball here, you have to admit. The animals assumed, we as a reader assumed, but Snowball did the wrong thing. he acted in a hypocritical way. Okay, now, remember old Major with his idea that we don't want to become like human beings, but Snowball starts to do things that show, I suppose, that he can take what's best about humans and what's also worst about humans. He studies the old book of Julius Caesar's military campaigns. Now, where did he get that? He'd have to have got that in the farmhouse. You're not allowed into the farmhouse, yet he did that. So rules are being broken secretly, just like Napoleon has his own little secret strategies. So his campaign here, you can justify it because you can say it's for the protection of the animals and animalism. Yes, that's true, but it is going against rules that the pigs themselves set up. No one was ever to go to the farm. No one was meant to be like a human, and yet he's reading and writing. Oh, I don't know how to bring that up. Anyway, well, maybe if I try this. No, don't know. But anyway. Okay, Snowball, start of the Battle of the Cowshed. Now, you have to remember the Battle of the Cowshed shows Snowball at his best and at his worst. He has this squeal of retreat, and I think that's important because what is Napoleon doing? He's building up his ego. He wants to be the man in charge, well, the pig in charge, and everything is about his ego. Whereas here, Snowball does something that really is showing a lack of ego, because he's not afraid of looking like the loser. He sacrifices pride and ego at this moment with the idea of retreat for a greater purpose. It's strategy. It's tact. It is part of his tactical plan. And therefore, that's a good opportunity to show a contrast between Snowball and Napoleon. Remember, Napoleon has no place in the Battle of the Cowshed. He's nowhere to be seen. And here, with that squeal of retreat, Snowball is showing that his ego can be sacrificed. He doesn't mind looking like the loser because what he's doing is for the greater good of animalism. Just in relation to Snowball as that tactician, what happened next was just as he had intended. And that verb choice, intended, is important because what it shows you is that Snowball has outwitted man. He has used man's strategies against man and won. He copied them from Julius Caesar. So in some ways he's out of touch. In some ways he's too embedded in ideology to realise what's happening. But when it comes to action, when it comes to the Battle of the Cowshed, everything is as he intended. This sentence is a really important sentence for Snowball. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung. And two things that you would want to mention here in terms of language. The syntax of the sentence, the way it's structured. So what comes first, what's most important? Without halting. That idea that he is dedicated to his cause. He's willing to put his life on the line. And what you have is the active role that he plays juxtaposed with the inactive role of Napoleon. He is not in the Battle of Cowshed. Napoleon and Squealer, they are never mentioned. They're not there. They're hiding somewhere. So you've got that idea of the power and the belief and the devotion of Snowball, and all of it can be summed up in that verb choice. Flung himself on the enemy, flung himself on the weapons, didn't care about his safety, cared about promoting his belief, his devotion to an ideological cause. He's a pig of passion, a passionate pig. What more could you ask for? He's a pig of passion. He's determined to sacrifice himself. So when we think back to the little sacrifice that Boxer made with the sun hat, it's tenfold here with Snowball. He's willing to sacrifice his life for something that he believes in. Now, if the last quotation was about everything that's heroic about Snowball, then this quotation is everything that's damning about Snowball. Boxer thinks that he's killed one of the stable boys. He hasn't, of course, but he thinks that he has, and he never intended to do any harm. Remember Boxer, that quiet giant? Remember how careful he was in chapter 1 when he came into the barn and he didn't want to put his hooves down in case he squished a duck? Well, remember here, what you have is the idea that Boxer has been turned into a weapon of war. He is completely and utterly gutted. He's completely and utterly panicked when he thinks that he may have killed the human boy. And what is Snowball's reply to him? Well, it's this: no sentimentality, comrade. War is war. The only good human being is a dead one. Now look at that. It's got the emphatic tone. You've got the repetition of war is war. You've got that idea of pinpointing the enemy again. The only good human being is a dead one. And all of this shows his blind commitment, that his language is harsh. It does not have any room to understand Boxer's emotional state there. What he thinks is you can be blindly devoted to this cause, and anything that is wavering away from that blind devotion is worthless, needs to be cut out. And therefore he thinks that he can cut out all of Boxer's individuality, all of Boxer's feeling with his harsh rhetoric. It shows you that yes, he's devoted to this cause, yes, he can lay down his life for it, but his devotion is blinding him to the needs of others. This is important too. After the Battle of the Cowshed, and you've got the burial of the dead sheep, Snowball made a little speech. His little speech emphasising all the animals' need or opportunity to be ready to die for Animal Farm. And again, what it does is it devalues the lives of those who have, like the sheep. And it gives you this idea that perhaps the animals are expendable. You can get rid of the animals can die. The cause must never die. He's devoted to the cause, not to the animals. And remember, the poor dead sheep only gets a second-class medal. Who gets the first? Snowball and Boxer. And again, this is a system of belief that's meant to be supporting equality. And yet, what happens to equality? It's completely forgotten with the idea of hierarchy and distinctions brought in with these medals. Remember hierarchy? The life of the sheep is only worth a second-class medal, but Snowball and Boxer get first class. Does that seem fair? Does that seem to validate the phrase that all animals are equal? No. That's just the point that I made. The only other thing then perhaps is how quickly that's done. It says the medals were conferred there and then. And it gives you this idea that there's this natural or instinctive impulse in all of the animals to act in a self-interested way. That in some ways we're instinctively going to always go back to some sort of divided or hierarchical system. Okay, so in the campaign in chapter 5, what you have is Napoleon, and Napoleon says, vote for Napoleon in the full manger. What is it that Snowball is advocating? He's advocating the electrification of the farm through the windmill, though he doesn't know how that's going to happen. And also he's talking about the 3-day week. So what you have is, again, this distancing between Snowball and his ideologies and his beliefs and his hopes and his dreams for animalism and the reality of animalism, which is what Napoleon always goes back to. What will the animals want? They will always want their bellies full. They will always want to be making sure that their interests are always followed. And so Snowball picks up on that basic need. Napoleon's needs are basic, Snowball's needs are ideological. If Napoleon is offering the animals reality, Snowball is offering the animals dreams. Now, everybody needs dreams, but they also need food as well. Okay, so the dismissal of Snowball then. With that, you have Napoleon uttering a high-pitched whimper, the kind that no one had ever heard. Now, up until this point, you've always thought of Snowball as the strategist. He's the one who has read the campaigns of Julius Caesar, and he's the one who made sure that everything happened as he intended in the Battle of the Cowshed. But you also have had that idea that strategy has underpinned what Napoleon has done. And he's outsmarted Snowball. He's outsmarted him right from chapter 2 when he took the puppies from Pincher and Jessie. So the key thing to remember is that strategy, yes, Snowball seems to excel at that, but again, he's been out of touch, he's been outsmarted, he's been blinded by his ideology, and off he runs into the night. Okay, so then Snowball becomes, I suppose, if he tried to sell the animals' dreams, then he becomes sort of like a nightmare for the animals, which is a nice little bit of irony. The dream maker becomes the nightmare. You could use that. So what happens? Squealer and Napoleon, they begin their ad hominem attacks. Those pieces of propaganda where we're deliberately making personal attacks on Snowball. And remember, the destruction of the windmill and everything that happens thereafter is always linked back to Snowball. Snowball becomes the scapegoat. Okay, so what you have to remember is that with the idea of Snowball becoming the scapegoat, sometimes you get a little bit of satirical humour. For example, look at this phrase: out of spite, the humans pretended not to believe it was Snowball who had destroyed the windmill. That idea of out of spite, it's obvious that it wasn't Snowball. Snowball's not there. He's away. He doesn't come back ever. It's just that idea that he is used, that his presence is used to mop up all of the faults that are Napoleon's. But that can't be admitted. We can't ever see Napoleon as having a fault. He's infallible. What you must always remember is that something has to be responsible for the things that go wrong on the farm, and that something will always be Snowball. In relation to Snowball and his strategies and his dreams for the windmill and electrification of the farm, those dreams were not really built on firm foundations, and you get that from the building of the windmill. If the windmill was meant to be Snowball's legacy for the farm, well, it was a pretty shaky legacy because his walls were only 18-inch thick. It would never have worked. His idealism didn't really match up to the reality of what was happening. So yes, he promoted and developed this sense of belief. He made animals feel wonderfully proud. He made them feel emotively patriotic when they looked at that green flag. But all of those things created to develop devotion and belief in animalism, they weren't really matched to the reality of what life would be like on Animal Farm. That destruction of the windmill there, the destruction of the windmill proves the weakness in his ideology. That's an important thing. Okay, again, we've had the ad hominem attacks on Napoleon and also this idea of Napoleon as the common enemy. And that is exactly as Snowball and Squealer want it, for the reason that I said, because Napoleon has to be seen as infallible. I like this because this gives you an opportunity to talk about metaphor. Now remember when we were saying about the use of stylistic devices, that we have the detached journalistic style of Orwell, and whenever there's any sort of descriptive writing, it has to highlight a moment of significance. Well, look here at this metaphor for Snowball. It seemed as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence pervading the air around them and menacing them with all kinds of danger. And the idea here is that he is some sort of creature of nightmare, that he has a power which is beyond everything else, to create danger and panic in the farm. But what I think you need to do is look at this. The dramatic irony here is resulting from the idea of Snowball as this invisible influence menacing the creatures. However, the animals are misdirected in their fear, and that's done deliberately. The animals are manipulated to fear what they shouldn't need to worry about at all. Because if we misdirect the fear, if we point them in the direction of Snowball, then they will not actually appreciate what they should be fearful of, which is Napoleon and his totalitarian regime. So misdirect the fear onto Snowball, and that keeps the animals from really being aware of what should be giving them nightmares, which is the tyranny of Napoleon. Remember that Snowball is used primarily in the latter stages of the novel to rewrite history. His role in the Battle of the Cowshed, which you read, is completely and utterly changed by Squealer and by Napoleon. And that role here that we see in the rewriting of history is so important, because the animals have nothing to trust in any longer. As we say here, Napoleon and Snowball together, Napoleon and Squealer together, they have created this common enemy that's found within Snowball, a common enemy related to the past, common enemy related to the present, and that idea that they will always be scared of him. they've created a climate of fear, and that's a climate of fear that allows Snowball to be used and abused and manipulated in whatever way, shape or form Napoleon and Squealer want him to be. But when we think about Snowball, we have to think about the devotion, perhaps, that he brings out in others. Like, for example, Boxer. So when Boxer is told that Snowball was in league with Jones from the start, that he was always going to be traitorous in the Battle of the Cowshed, look at this. It says, even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, and of course that's his fault, that's the major flaw in the character of Boxer, even he was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his forehoofs beneath him, shut his eyes, and with a hard effort managed to formulate his thoughts. I do not believe that, he said. Now, you've got two things going on here. First of all, you've got that kind of cute, humorous description of poor Boxer trying really hard to think. And then you have his little short, emphatic statement, I do not believe that. For this is the first time that he says, no, Napoleon, who's always right, no, Squealer, who I absorb everything that you say. That cannot be right. And that little short emphatic statement is important because it's the moment where Boxer really puts himself out there as now an enemy that Napoleon is going to have to defeat. But most importantly, it shows how devoted and committed and how much he believed in Snowball. So despite Snowball's faults, despite his hypocrisy, despite his blind devotion, despite the weakness in his ideology, despite all those things, he was an animal who made other creatures devoted. He was an animal who inspired other creatures. He was an animal who made other creatures admire him to the point where they could not believe that he could be a traitor. And that little emphatic statement from Boxer, I do not believe that, is a testament to what's good about Snowball, what's admirable about Snowball, that he can inspire that sense of devotion, even when he's been blamed for everything in the last 3 chapters. Okay, so just remember that even though Snowball is used to really mop up all of the mistakes of Napoleon, there are parts of Snowball that are admirable, there are parts of Snowball that are not, and if we are to communicate this in our essay, we must focus on your argument. So by and large, is he admirable? By and large, is he a creature worth the devotion of Boxer? You'd probably have to say yes, but you need your paragraph of counter-argument, and there are lots and lots of points there that you could bring in that paragraph of counter-argument. Okie dokie, so that's Snowball.